Current day professional wrestling is filled with fantastic black wrestlers, be they powerhouses, high flyers, technicians, serious, comedic, male, female, veterans, or rookies. But for a long time, if you were black and had dreams of being a pro wrestler, you were destined to portray some form of stereotype, such as the angry black man, the gangster, the pimp, the manservant, the funky jive dancer, African, or Caribbean. Thanks to the hard work of numerous black wrestlers, we're treated to more variety, more genuineness, and more relatable acts. However, let's look back at a time where success for a black wrestler was seen as an oddity. Specifically, let's take a look at one of the earliest showcases of success in black wrestling by revisiting the career of the first black world champion, Bearcat Wright, in this edition of Spotlight. Born January 13, 1932, Edward M. Wright didn't have to look far to find his legendary moniker, thanks to his similarly named pro boxing father, Edward Bearcat Wright Sr. In addition to sharing names, Bearcat would follow in his father's footprints and become a pro boxer in the 1950s. While he had the skill to be a boxer, fighting in main event matches at age 17 and retiring with a record of 8-0, with 5 wins coming from knockout, professional wrestling would call out to him just 1 year after his boxing debut. He would train to be a professional wrestler while he was still boxing, in one case, literally combining the two, losing a 3 falls combination boxing and wrestling match to Danny O'Sullivan in 1951. As a boxer, Bearcat attracted a lot of attention for being the tallest heavyweight boxer at the time, but as described by sports writer Jim Rose, he's too big to step across the ring very fast and would have to rely on a knockout, because a faster opponent would wear him out before 15 rounds were over. It wasn't just his stamina conditioning that would make him consider leaving boxing though, it was the money that pro wrestling brought him. In the words of Bearcat himself, "In my first 2 bouts on successive nights, I earned $225. That was more than I cleared in 22 bouts as a pro fighter." While his father did not approve of his son's transition to pro wrestling, by 1952, Bearcat Wright began to wrestle full-time, working a lot of shows in Minneapolis and Ohio. When he would wrestle in Minnesota, he wore a mask and wrestled under the name the Black Panther. It would take time for him to get his footing in the business, as he was far from a natural and lacked any formal training in wrestling beforehand. Plus, he was tall and somewhat lanky, but while he was learning the ropes, he would oftentimes be paired with fellow black wrestler Bobo Brazil. By 1960, Bearcat became one of the country's hottest babyfaces, during a time where black people couldn't even use the same water fountains as whites. Bearcat drew in approximately 31,000 people to watch him face Buddy Rogers in the semi-main event in Chicago. This wasn't a lone occurrence. He and Buddy Rogers set a record prior to this by drawing a crowd of 16,000 to watch them in Washington, D.C. He would also draw a crowd of 26,000 in his match against Killer Kowalski in Chicago, where he would win and become the big-time wrestling heavyweight champion, becoming the first black wrestler to win a major singles title in the territories. And if that's not impressive enough for you, it's estimated that between 15,000 and 30,000 people walked the streets outside the International Amphitheater in Chicago in frustration because they couldn't get tickets to see Bearcat fight Johnny Valentine. Everything I just said took place in the year 1960. The same year, Bearcat would revolt against what was called an unofficial ban on mixed-race matches in the city of Gary, Indiana. He would publicly decry arenas that prohibited mixed-race matches, and by doing so, gain laurels in the form of support from the NAACP, but also punishment in the form of a brief suspension from the Athletic Commission. Fortunately, the suspension was brief, and as Bearcat put it, slowly, mixed wrestling began to open up everywhere. In 1961, just 5 days before the historic March on Washington, where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would deliver his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech, Bearcat would face Classy Freddie Blassie in Los Angeles for the World Wrestling Associates World Heavyweight Championship. By defeating Blassie via a 3rd fall countout, Bearcat would become the first black wrestler to hold a major world championship. Let's take this time to clarify 3 things that I know some of you are racing to the comments to post about. First off, yes, I did say on 2 separate occasions Bearcat became the first black wrestler to hold a major singles title. However, the difference is in the level of distinction. Big Time Wrestling, in comparison to World Wrestling Associates, was like comparing PWG to Black and Gold NXT. BTW was a locally popular promotion that put on a good product and had a world title, versus WWA, which would eventually become a part of the National Wrestling Alliance, the largest body in pro wrestling at the time. So usually, when people discuss Bearcat's historic reign as the first Black World Champion, they're referring to his reign with the WWA title, but his first time as a World Champion was technically in BTW, and seeing as this was before the internet, it wasn't unusual to treat the local wrestling promotion as the grandest stage of them all. The second discrepancy you may want to call me out on is the common misconception that Bobo Brazil was the first Black World Champion, coincidentally with a WWA title as well, when in actuality he won the championship in 1966, 3 years after Bearcat's reign. Finally, and perhaps the most controversial, the claim that Ron Simmons was the first Black World Champion with his WCW title reign. Let me start by saying I respect Ron Simmons immensely. I believe he is severely underappreciated and considered making this video about him, but the claim that he was the first Black World Champion is a bit of revisionist history by WWE, as they only count title reigns under promotions that they absorbed under their brand, such as WCW. This is similar to how WWE claims Ric Flair is a 16-time world champion when he's actually had at least 20 world title reigns. Freddie Blassie may have been the one to convince promoters to bring Bearcat to Los Angeles, but he would soon regret it. According to Blassie, very quickly, he let the wind go to his head. He became very delusional. Blassie would claim Bearcat put himself in front of the business. This is backed by female wrestler Violet Ray, who claimed Bearcat called her and her husband, Carnival Wrestling promoter David Van Vliet, and informed them that now that he was world champion, he wasn't going to give it up. After returning from an emergency appendectomy surgery, Freddie Blassie stated he was ready to wrestle Bearcat and reclaim the world title. However, Bearcat stood true to his belief that he shouldn't have to drop the strap and would shoot pin Blassie after a headbutt by physically holding him down and leaving with the title. This created a very real problem for the WWA. Bearcat was a physically dominating human being. He would legitimately rip phone books in half mid-match to prove his strength, so finding a person who could legitimately beat him was a challenge. However, the WWA would succeed in finding such a person. At the planned rematch between Bearcat and Blassie, Blassie would be replaced at the last second with judo champion and submission wrestler Judo Gene LeBell. If that name sounds familiar to you, it's because LeBell would go on to train fighters such as Ronda Rousey, Chuck Norris, and even Roddy Piper. And he's also the namesake for Daniel Bryan's LeBell Lock. The match would never happen, however, as minutes after he entered the arena, Bearcat was warned about the change and how LeBell was brought in to both forcibly beat Bearcat for the title and teach him a lesson. Upon being told, Bearcat was seen grabbing the title, leaving the arena, and driving away. As a result, the WWA would strip Bearcat of the title. Despite this, Bearcat remained a popular attraction until his retirement in 1974. He would unfortunately pass away at the age of 50 in 1982 from sickle cell anemia and be posthumously inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2017. The life and times of Edward Bearcat Wright weren't always easy. From being a talented boxer with an empty wallet to breaking racial barriers in the pro wrestling world. There are still facts that I hadn't even touched about him, like how Bearcat was one of the first wrestlers to regularly perform a flying dropkick, or his time managing Buddy Colt, or promoters claiming he was from Jamaica. So please, take the time to look up this fascinating human being, because it's thanks to his hard work during a hard time that we're able to enjoy the fascinating spectrum of talent we have in the form of black wrestlers today. That's the reason why West Coast Popcast celebrates Bearcat Wright and is proud to put him in the spotlight.